How does a character go from here to here?
何かダメなお兄ちゃんでも
But maybe this isn't even the correct question to ask here, because bad guy going good is not exactly a revolutionary trope in storytelling. So maybe the better question to ask here is why Killua's complete change of character feels so incredibly authentic and natural, and why his story is so strongly relatable. There's a reason why Killua Zoldyck is by far the most beloved character in a story that Yoshihiro Togashi has filled to the brim with fascinatingly complex and intriguing characters. Being cool, charismatic, and at times even a bit creepy, Killua is already a through and through enjoyable character even just at the superficial level. And being the second protagonist of the story, we accompany him on his journey with Gon through the dangerous world of Hunter x Hunter and enjoy watching him grow stronger and more mature. A typical shonen adventure. But as is the case with almost all characters in this beautifully crafted series, you have to dig just a tiny bit deeper into the structure of the plot to discover that Killua's character is pretty much as complex and multi-layered as it gets. Killua's arc contains a number of underlying themes that I think are all worth looking at in detail to truly understand his character. This includes his quest to break free from the chains of his family, developing self-worth, seeking freedom of will, and ultimately, finding his purpose in life. All elements that Togashi has not only connected to the plot at hand and Killua's journey through the world, but that he also has interconnected and woven into each other to form a complete and organic feeling character that is shaped by his upbringing, but also his environment. As we've discussed in the last video, the overall theme of Hunter x Hunter is humanity, and what it means to be human in a superhuman world. And Togashi uses the classic trope of the buddy story to contrast both Killua and Gon and their growth and coming of age from a realistic and credible perspective.
キルアはいいよね冷静でいられて
Thus, instead of going chronologically, which might feel a bit too much like a recap of the story, I think it's best to look at the relationship between Killua and Gon first to give you a better idea of the overall character, and then delve deeper into the details of his character arc. Before we can discuss the dreadfully dramatic dream team that is Killua and Gon, however, I believe that we first have to take a closer look at Killua's upbringings to really understand how he became the unsettlingly dark boy that we first meet during the Hunter exam. Killua's tragic childhood and the complex relations within his family are something that is revealed only in increments by Togashi while we travel from arc to arc. While we personally get to see his family home and parts of his relatives in the Zoldyck family arc after the Hunter exam, many crucial details surrounding the family are revealed in other arcs. Killua's relationship with Illumi, for instance, is introduced during the Hunter exam arc. His grandfather appears for the very first time in the York New arc to take out Crollo, and Aluka is only introduced after the Chimera Ant arc. And so, if you sometimes feel a bit confused by all the different relationships and connections within the Zoldyck family, first of all, you're not alone, but secondly, this seems to have been done on purpose, as this panel here illustrates pretty well, I think. Now, this incremental introduction of Killua's family and all its members serves two larger purposes, I believe. Firstly, next to Killua, several of the Zoldycks generally play a relevant role in several story arcs and seem to be a major force in the world, politically and militarily. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, I think, Togashi slowly shares more and more information about Killua's past and true personality as an essential part of his character arc and development, which we'll be discussing in a second. Overall, there are four major themes in Killua's past that make him the inhuman person that we meet at the beginning of the story and that he needs to overcome throughout his journey with Gon. Assassination, torture, expectations, and love. So let's look at each of these elements in a bit more detail. As the Zoldycks are a family of assassins, violence and murder are not only part of their daily business, but of their family identity. Killua was trained and shaped to become a top-tier assassin basically from the moment that he was born. Growing up in this kind of environment, Killua has grown numb to the act of killing, to the point where he even seems to be getting a bit of enjoyment out of it. We can see this for instance in chapter 14 during the Hunter exam arc, where he grows frustrated playing ball with Netero and Gon. At some point, he relies more and more on excessive force, resulting in a kick that, in Netero's words, would be capable of shattering a normal person's leg. And so, after leaving the game, in the bloodlust that has started to overtake him throughout the match, he releases his frustration on some unfortunate Hunter examinees that cross his path, leaving them dead on the ground as Killua walks away without so much as a second glance at them. Thus, his upbringing has left him with little regard for the value of life and the use of violence against others. Now, as part of his training and due to the high expectations in him, Killua was also subjected to countless tortures by the hand of his own family when he was young. As a result, he became immune to poison, developed a high tolerance to electricity, and grew in agility and strength, with his fingernails being able to turn into sharp claws. But the cruel physical abuse clearly has left some strong marks on him, physically and mentally. While Killua does in fact try his best to conceal any signs of the torture and cruelty he had to endure all his life, slowly but steadily we learn more and more about the horrors he must have had to endure. From Illumi's manipulation to the scars he carries on his body that we can clearly see during his training with Biscuit, we finally understand that the horrible insights we got into Killua's childhood in the family house were apparently only the tip of the iceberg. Here we actually get a first glimpse into this, when Miluki is attempting to torture Killua after running off to take the Hunter exam. The fact that he was brutally tortured at the hand of his own brother didn't seem to bother him at all, neither physically nor mentally. However, while Killua might have grown numb to his own abuse, he seems to clearly understand that what has happened to him was and is terrible. Because once he learned that Gon, Leorio and Kurapika had come for him, the very notion that his friends could be threatened placed Killua in an immediately aggressive disposition, where he appeared more than willing to attack his own brother, something that Miluki seemed to immediately pick up upon himself, given his troubled expression here. And while this is only one example out of many, it already does offer us our first implication of Killua's cripplingly perverted sense of self-worth. Having known nothing else in his entire life, Killua didn't mind being tortured, almost as if he felt that for him, to experience this was only natural and entirely acceptable. And yet he was completely enraged at the thought that someone else he cared about might have had to endure this very same treatment. So his relationship to torture is not only a strong indicator of Killua's lack of self-worth, but also gives us a first insight that despite his cruel past, he still has a natural sense of morality that lies suppressed under his numbness, something that I think his family without any doubt wished to get rid of. Now, on top of everything his family did to him, or maybe exactly because of it, Killua also suffers under the heavy expectations that his parents have in him for becoming the heir to the family legacy. The Zoldycks are infamous in the Hunter world for being top-tier assassins with some of the most capable fighters in the story. And yet, within this group of monsters, it was Killua that was chosen to one day take over the family because he showed the most potential out of all his siblings, including his brother Illumi. But despite being a true prodigy in terms of fighting and mastering new skills, something that he demonstrates over and over again side by side with Gon, Killua has no interest whatsoever in continuing the family business, which I think is quite understandable given how his family has treated him. And it's one of the reasons that Killua is looking for his own purpose in life and makes us readers wonder whether or not he actually has a free will of his own. And this already brings me to the last theme of Killua's childhood: love. As we will see again later on in this video, expressing affection and love is something that Killua is struggling with throughout the story, and it's something that he has to learn more about first. Throughout large parts of it, Killua only knows how to show his love for others by protecting them. For instance, he tries to protect Gon countless times during their journey and was reduced to tears at the thought of failing. He stood up for Zushi, and he even initiated his friendship with Ikalgo by saving his life, only to name a few examples. His inexperience with expressing such emotions comes from the twisted sense of love that he's experienced from mostly his mother Kikyo and his brother Ilomi. Kikyo was willing to literally chain Killua down and beat him if it meant keeping him quote-unquote safe, at least in her eyes. Ilomi, meanwhile, in his overprotective and almost psychopathic way, went so far as to implant one of his manipulative Nen needles into Killua without his knowledge or consent, giving him subconscious orders that dictated his actions throughout most of the series. Both of their abusive shows of affection for Killua have most likely accompanied him all his life, and based on nothing but his own innate sense of morality, protecting was the only thing he really knew how to do. And so these four elements, assassination, torture, expectations, and love, are what I believe have made Killua the physically strong but emotionally broken kid that Gon first meets at the Hunter entrance exam. And I think that the Zoldyck family home does a wonderful job of symbolizing all this. The inside of the house is more akin to a medieval castle, decked out with a modern security system, a torture room, and even a secret room to hide a sister. Being on top of a mountain, it's quite isolated, and because of the numerous safeguards and obstacles that separate outsiders from the family, starting with the testing gate, it's also easy to see why Killua never had any friends until he met Gon, assassin's training and duties aside, making it painfully clear why Killua wanted to break free from his family so badly. Based on the theme of humanity and the realistic approach that Hunter x Hunter takes on people, it is only understandable then that Killua ended up with such a dark, twisted, and insecure perspective after experiencing so much physical and emotional abuse. And so I think it's more than fair to say that the Zoldyck family is the main source of Killua's need for finding free will, self-worth, and a purpose in life. And so, now that we know this underlying psychological background, let's now look at what happened when Togashi threw this character into the Hunter world. And what better place to start than the most important relationship in the story, his friendship with Gon. We already talked a little bit about the relationship between Gon and Killua in the last video. However, I purposefully decided to save the majority of it for today, since I think we need some understanding of both Killua and Gon, so we can truly understand and appreciate their connection in full. The main thing I think that makes the friendship between them so special is that they have completely mirrored character arcs, one negative and the other positive. Gon goes from joyful and caring at the beginning of the story to numb, cruel, and inhuman towards the end. Killua, meanwhile, goes from numb, cruel, and inhuman to joyful and caring. And so, while Gon's lowest point is close towards the end of the story in his brutal murder of Pitou, Killua's lowest point in the story is pretty close towards the beginning, at the end of the Hunter exam. First, as we already mentioned, he kills off some of the other Hunter examinees, simply out of annoyance and bloodlust. And later, during the final stage, he ends up failing the Hunter exam overall for killing another contender, manipulated by Ilomi and being recaptured by the claws of his family. He leaves behind Gon and goes back home with his will and dreams once again broken. This state of complete surrender to his family and the cruel act of murder he commits are the absolute bottom point for Killua in the entire series. And from this point forward, his arc is on a constant incline. Ironically enough, it was actually Gon's friendship and original morality that saved Killua, and Gon's later moral decline encourages him to question his own morality and views. Both Gon and Killua had to grow up with no friends around them, and both of them want to travel the world and become stronger. Thus, the Hunter exam was the perfect arc format to quickly establish a friendship between these two characters right at the start of the story in a very believable way. Since both of them were the youngest contenders in a contest meant for adults, they naturally found each other, while at the same time highlighting their uniqueness. However, while Gon immediately sees Killua as his friend, given his past and low sense of self-worth, Killua seems to feel like he has to earn Gon's friendship first. Thus, during the final examination, he reveals that all he really wants is for Gon to be his friend, without realizing that it's A, not something he needs to ask for, and B, that Gon already considers him his best friend at this point. And even though Leorio tells him that he already is Gon's friend, under the influence of his brother, Killua's spirit breaks and he sees his dream being crushed. In the despair that overtakes him in his brother's presence, he apparently defaults to the only thing he'd ever known in his life, and he kills Botero in cold blood, without Gon there to stop him, ultimately returning home, certain that he, after all, has no will of his own. And when Killua is literally chained up again inside his family house, it once again is Gon who comes to save him and takes him out into the world, showing Killua that he now truly has made a real friend. Gon is Killua's light in the dark, something that he makes very clear in this moment here.
お前は光だ。
This is probably one of my favorite scenes in the story. It brings us back to the start of the adventure, before going into the dark part of the Chimera Ant arc. It's just one of many moments where Killua finds himself the most worthless person in the world, all while believing that Gon would be able to lead him to a better life. And throughout the story, Gon does exactly that. He teaches Killua how to engage in healthy interactions with other people, how to express love in different ways, and he offers him a motivation for self-improvement. It was this motivation that led Killua to master Nen and Hatsu to the incredible degree he has, and ultimately to remove the needle planted in him by Illumi, finally allowing his true personality to shine through. And so, despite his creeping decline into darkness, for the kid who came from darkness in the first place, Gon indeed served as a light to help Killua navigate his own and turn on his inner light switch. And ultimately, I think that Killua really seems to have learned from Gon's influence on himself, of being a light to the darkness. Because towards the end, we find that Killua has now taken on the role of being a light for Aluka. And so, while Gon's character arc followed the path of a tragedy, Killua's much rather was a journey of redemption. Thus, Gon's falling character arc and Killua's rising one slowly approach each other until they finally cross paths during the Greed Island arc, where I would argue both are roughly at the same moral level, and the two boys are the closest and most similar to each other. With the beginning of the Chimera Ant arc, however, we see a rapid alienation between the two. Gon's arc starts spiraling into darkness, while Killua's has a sudden uptake after removing Illumi's needle. And so, during the arc, Gon's and Killua's relationship reaches its climax, and so despite Killua's alien position to the audience at the start of the series as a young assassin, he quickly becomes a far easier reference point than Gon. He starts to see nuance in situations where Gon only sees his own twisted sense of black and white. And so, Killua is the one to save Gon from being killed by the Chimera Ant early in the arc, while Gon, fully unprepared, throws himself into combat in order to get revenge for the death of his friend. Finally liberated from Illumi's influence, and with his newfound sense of free will and independence, Killua begins to understand the complex sense of justice and morality that the world of Hunter x Hunter operates on, and increasingly grows worried about Gon's single-minded and inflexible approach. And so, when Gon is supposed to show his resolve to morale, he visualizes all the hate and negative emotions inside him to fuel a frightening attack. Only in the last moment, Killua steps in and manages to pull Gon back from the brink, looking seriously worried for his friend.
ゴン、お
Later, however, as Gon vows to kill the innocent bystander Komugi to get a shot at Pitou for killing Kite, Killua isn't able to reach his friend anymore. Because at this point, Gon doesn't understand Killua's true feelings anymore, as he demonstrated so touchingly after the hunter exam. And so, when Killua finally reaches him and Pitou, Gon says this. We can see Killua visibly tensing up here and being deeply hurt by Gon's words. And so, once Gon snaps and trades in his remaining humanity for violence, Killua fully abandons his cruel past, but still is unable to do anything but watch in horror. After saving Gon's life, both boys finally decide to go their own ways, and it truly feels like something significant has changed. It's a departure in every sense of the word, and so when the lingering final shot of the two opposing Gungi pieces overlapping each other slowly fades away, it feels almost impossible to reconcile the beginning of the show with the end, with both of them having switched places. I think by now we're starting to get a pretty good idea of Killua and what it is that drives his character. Killua's behavior and actions over the course of their journey are quite different from Gon's, something I think Togashi wonderfully explains through their Nen types. Gon is an enhancer who are simple and determined. Most of them never lie, hide nothing, and are very straightforward in their actions or in their thinking. Their words and actions are often dominated by their feelings, and they're generally very selfish and focused on their own goals, something that basically describes Gon pretty perfectly. The same I think goes for Killua being a Transmuter type. They are whimsical, prone to deceit, and fickle, and many tend to hide their true intentions. This also fits Killua pretty well. After all, who other than a whimsical Transmuter could be expected to spend 200 million Jenny on snacks? Additionally, Killua is not opposed to lying. Being the genuinely well-meaning person that he is, he only lies when necessary, as observed by Bisky. Yet, he does lie nonetheless. The most notable trait here, however, is his extreme inclination to conceal information. As expressed near the end of the York New arc, Killua will choose to remain ignorant rather than ask a question that shows his ignorance to others, being grateful that Gon asked the questions he was so reluctant to. Additionally, despite admiring Gon so much, he tends to withhold most of his feelings or thoughts for him. Thus, Killua is quickly embarrassed when Gon draws attention to their friendship, as the true value of their bond is something that Killua prefers to keep for himself. The finest example of this is the heart-wrenching plea to Palm to help Gon out of his dark mindset. According to the narrator, Killua had intended to lie here as well and conceal his true feelings, and yet in a moment of emotional desperation, let it slip. This short act of opening up was so powerful for him that he simply couldn't conceal anything in this moment, breaking down into tears and begging. Also, since many transmuters rely on techniques that give unique and unpredictable properties to their Nen that reflect their personalities, something we'll also be exploring in the next video on Hisoka, I think Killua's electricity powers are also a wonderful representation of his past and growth at the same time. And so I think it's finally time to look at Killua's character arc and how his character has developed over the course of the story. Differently than Gon, Killua starts into the story without a clear desire or purpose. His original desire was to break free from his family and to find his own path, and yet since he manages to do so relatively early on, he then lacks any specific goal and thus accompanies Gon on his journey to find his father. Now, that doesn't mean that Killua doesn't have a drive though. As we've discussed before, on a more subconscious level, Killua's need is to break free from his brother's control, to regain his free will, find self-worth, and ultimately a new purpose in life. A philosophy that, by the way, is called Ikigai in Japanese. We've already discussed large parts of the first half of the story, except for the York New arc, where Killua is prepared to sacrifice himself so that Gon can escape the Phantom Troop. But what I really want to focus on, however, is Killua's moment of revelation and the climax of his arc, the emotional battle with the Chimera and Rammet. Seeing his friend being on the verge of death, Killua's will to save Gon comes into conflict with his brother's orders to run away from any strong opponent. And so, after once again apologizing to Gon for not being of any use to him, the friendship and love that he's built towards him overpower his brother's powers, and he's able to remove the needle that he wasn't even aware of until that very point. The scene has some striking implications for Killua, presents the moment of redemption, and it touches upon all of the themes surrounding his character. Are we slaves to our birth, to our genetics, the way our families brought us up, or the lack of a family? Or by sheer force of will and concentrated effort, can we choose to become something different than what we were and surpass the limitations set by our upbringing? It's a very personal issue that ultimately culminates into one central question. How much agency do we actually have about our own lives? The needle suddenly gives us a whole lot of answers about Killua's behavior that's been haunting us the entire series. And I think finally realizing that Killua was being controlled and manipulated by Illumi suddenly also makes his gruesome choice to kill Bodoro a bit more understandable. Because I think in this moment, Killua was simply feeling overwhelmed, confused, and was struggling to overcome this subconscious urge while remaining faithful to his friends. And so I think feeling caught by his brother and uncertain of Leorio's own chances to pass the exam, Killua decided to give up his own chances to become a hunter to help Leorio achieve his dream. Of course, his lack of self-worth also played a role in this choice, I believe, allowing all of his friends but himself to become a hunter. And so it's not only a very cathartic moment for us readers, but also for Killua himself to find out that his fear and uselessness was actually caused by Illumi's Hatsu and not due to his own cowardice. As it turns out, there never was anything wrong with Killua in the first place, showing us that he was actually the best friend anyone could ever wish for, being as loyal and dependable in spite of the literal mind control trying to push him away. And so I think that this moment gives us an even deeper insight into Killua's personality. In one regard, it allows us to see just how far Killua will go for those he loves. While captured by the Phantom Troop, surrounded on all sides by some of the most infamous and dangerous Nen users in the world, Killua still instinctively began to intervene in Gon's mistreatment until Hisoka stopped him. I think we can only imagine what kind of pressure Killua must have felt due to the needle in this situation and how many escape plans were running through his mind. And yet he was ready to stand up for his friend in need. For me, this establishes Killua as one of the most protective, caring, and self-sacrificing characters in all of manga. And what I find also important to note here is that this moment is not the end for his character arc, but rather a start that really enabled Killua to grow way faster than before, actually steepening his arc even more. In the events that follow this scene, we see Killua stand up to the Royal Guard, chase down Gon, challenge his family, protect Aluka, and see to Gon's healing. A true snowball effect of greater and greater displays of determination, intelligence, and loyalty, only made possible by allowing Killua to finally be himself. The Killua held back by Illumi's needle was caught in darkness, outshone by Gon's light. Once it was removed, however, Killua proved in every way to be the one shining by far the brightest in their friendship from that point onwards. While Gon removes himself from all his friends around him more and more after Kite's death, Killua forms countless new relationships over the course of the Chimera Ant arc. And this goes so far that he even befriends one of the ants itself. Being part of the enemy, Ikalgo would have straightforwardly been killed if this was Hunter x and Killua, operating under the standard practices of the family business. However, at this point, Killua has developed such a strong sense of morality, compassion, and nuanced decision-making that he understands the ant's complex situation and ultimately saves him. Exactly the development that Gon failed to make in this arc. As a result, Killua not only makes a friend, but his kindness is repaid almost immediately when Ikalgo saves him after an unsettlingly dangerous game of darts. And I think the growth he undergoes in this arc is even reflected in his fighting. When Killua unveils his ultimate Hatsu technique, Godspeed, on Yuppie, who previously was way stronger than him, it is a striking sign of just how much his character, and thus also his skills, have grown. While it's true that Killua was always a prodigy, able to learn new skills way faster than normal, and that his cruel childhood gave him a physical advantage in other ways, it was his journey with Gon, and ultimately his own innate will and humanity, that enabled one of my favorite character arcs in general. And so, with the end of the Chimera End arc, Killua has finally found his sense of self-worth and his free will. The only things left for his arc were breaking fully free from his family and finding a purpose in life. And ironically enough, once again it's Gon who enables this change. Being on the verge of death after his inhuman transformation, Killua travels home to ask his little sister Aluka and the something living inside her to heal Gon's wounds. Fittingly to their opposed character arcs, Killua is the main protagonist of this last arc in the story, being a much more relatable hero than Gon was towards the end. Freeing and traveling with his sister, Killua finally realizes that she is his new purpose in life, and that he can be for Aluka and Nanika what Gon was for him, a light in the darkness.
Killua!
And so at the end of his arc, when he parts ways with Gon to travel with his sister, Killua has finally found what Gon has lost: his humanity. And similar to Gon, his character arc has basically found a complete end at this point. So should Killua ever return to the story, he will need a new character arc as well. The powerful message that Togashi is sending with this character here is that you're not bound by your upbringing, but have the freedom to forge your own path, and that morality and humanity are something that can bloom even under the harshest circumstances. So now that we've discussed the mirroring structure of Gon's extreme negative and Killua's extreme positive arc, I think in the next video I want to discuss a character with a flat character arc. It is one of the most iconic figures in anime and manga, and for a very good reason often used as the face of the series. I'm of course talking about Hisoka, and one of the most creative antagonists I know. So stay tuned for that. Okay, wow, I've been rambling forever now. Thanks guys, peace.